Thank you all very much for coming back today. Day 2 is going to be the really important day when we actually work into our groups and start creating some visions. Okay. Here's Andy. Excellent. Andy, come on up and join the panel. Well, thank you all for. We shifted this last panel to early morning because I think we were all getting a little tired yesterday, and we thought this was kind of a really important panel. Let me just take a moment to do something I forgot to do yesterday, which is a really important thing for me to have done, and that is to acknowledge the team at Kent State, without whom none of this would have happened. And that would be Janet Korzenko, who I know many of you have spoken to. She's sitting in the back of the room. Jake Spiegler, who I'm sure many of you already know. He's a webinar star. If you've attended any of our webinars, you know Jake. And Nicole. Where's Nicole? She stepped out. Well, Nicole is our communications lead, essentially. When you see me tweeting, it's not really me, it's Nicole. So she checks everything I do, and she does things for me. All right, so I'm going to stop talking now and let John introduce his panel. And then after the panel, we'll take a short break and then get into our groups. Thank you, everyone.
Good. Thanks for coming back for this encore. I lost my mood ring, and I'm not sure how to feel about that. And the point I want to make is we really rely on big data and all kinds of external things to kind of tell us something we already know, don't we? I think we can look at reports, but there's something going on big that's not right, and I think the people that are here understand that without some external report telling us, and we're all here to fix that, and I'm just honored to be part of that and glad to be here today. So with that quick intro, we're going to be talking about the academic standpoint, and as I mentioned yesterday, some terms, sometimes words hold people back. So if that's a word that you've got some kind of connotation, negative around or whatever, think of this as learning institutions. So as I kick it off and have the panel introduce themselves, we're going to talk about stakeholders, but I think that we could be thinking about this a little bit more broadly than if you're picturing some brick and mortar building or whatever you're picturing when you hear the word academics. So with that, I'm going to kick it off and let everyone sort of introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what you think of when you hear the word academics for this panel.
My name is Bob Hambley. I am actually representing the Graduate School for Computer and Information Sciences from Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale. My background is I did 23 years in the military, culminating as a CIO. A lot of background as a CIO for the U.S. Army Special Operations Command out of Fort Bragg. When I finished that up, I was actually hired by SIIC to install telecommunications infrastructures in medical centers that were larger than 1 million square feet. After doing that, I went to work for Cognos Corporation, Business Intelligence Systems, which was subsequently acquired by IBM. And on September 8th of 2001, I took a 3-day jaunt to Germany to work with the federal government in Germany. And my 3-day trip turned into a 30-day try to get home venture on 9/11. As a consequence of 9/11, I was invited back into the government because I had also an extensive background in special operations, and that led to my being for the last 8 years before retirement a second time. So I don't know if I'm doing what was called yesterday an encore career as much as curtain calls. But I retired as the CKO for the Joint Special Operations Command at the beginning of this year. Why am I representing Nova Southeastern University? Because I'm a PhD student, and my dissertation is currently underway, finished coursework. I did speak to my academic advisor and the leadership at Nova, and they said, hey, you're the right guy to come into this forum. And Denise, I thank you and your crew for the invitation. Oh, by the way, even though I'm a CIO in my former life, I'm as technology agnostic as they come. So if you want to talk to me about technology, understand that I come from the standpoint that I pretty much understand that SharePoint will not solve cancer nor the common cold. So, thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Annie Green, and I'm going to put on my academic hat, so I'm representing George Washington University and Kent State University.
Hi, I'm Garrison Lemasters. I teach at the Programming Communication Culture and Technology at Georgetown University, which is a graduate program here with Denise as one of my colleagues. And I tend to be interested, as I'll talk about later, in, of all things, video games and simulations. And play as it's involved in this. So.
I'm Jeremy Reel. I'm with the University of Illinois at Chicago at the Learning Sciences Research Institute there, where I'm also a doc student, but I also coordinate a group that does research and works with faculty professionals. We do research on professional development on how to integrate or create innovative uses of technology for teaching and research.
So we've got a great panel of people that are used to sitting on both sides of the desk like me. One of the things that came up yesterday, I'm glad that we were reminded, is that learning is fun. And so I got thinking about that last night, that learning about learning, that's like ecstasy then, right? So that's another level. So
You say so.
That's a whole other level. So I wanted to just bring us back to that, just kind of connect the feelings and cognition around this. That if we should be having that feeling about learning, just to bring us back, because Garrison made me think of that too, is like thinking about gaming and simulation, how to bring that in to what learning really should be. Because I've seen it happen in elementary school, and the kids are just really excited to go off to school, and something happens in middle school. And you try to put your finger on what happened. They lose their individuality, they lose the excitement, the creativity. It's just memorize this, we've got it all figured out. And there's something that happens, and I think that can happen at different places in the way that we approach learning. So I'd like to just run a series of questions down through the panel just to talk about when I look at this question. It's the first one. Who are stakeholders? Given the broad standpoint of learning institutions where learning is fun, let's think of it that way. How would you define a list of who our stakeholders are?
Hard question.
For the knowledge science, I think the stakeholders are the students, because they deserve academics that teach them to not only know the science, but also to apply it to go into the workforce. I think that the stakeholders are the teachers or the instructors, because we need some type of standard and consistent method, so we aren't teaching people or teaching the students all types of things that don't actually integrate well together. And again, I'm an engineer, so I believe that things are system-based. I also believe that they need to be coupled and cohesive to make a total solution. And I also believe that it is the academic institutions as well as the institutions that certify.
Where I come from, I have to admit, stakeholder is a very odd term. I'm not completely comfortable with that term. I come from a background in philosophy and philosophy of technology, and I would suggest that ultimately, I mean, we're talking about human beings, we're talking about a certain ethical responsibility to being. Learning is bound up in being. That's one of the things that we're finding, right? That you can't separate the knowledge from the knower, right? That knowledge increasingly is experiential, and it has to factor into your being. That's why people come back from retirement, because they know they've been there. And that's one of the things that simulation in the future will offer us, is the opportunity not to curate knowledge, but to curate sites for the experience, or the generation of experience, right? So one of the things that I just keep coming back to is I appreciate the need for capital, and I appreciate the need for standardization, and for thinking about workforces, but ultimately we're also thinking about human beings, and that's an important thing to bear in mind. Learning is integral to being.
My response to this would be that we need to be thinking about this at multiple levels. To echo what has already been said, it's not just the student, not just the teacher, but there's an entire ecosystem of things happening within just one classroom. You've got a relationship between technology, you've got a relationship with the teacher, the student, the other students, and how the other students interact with each other, and then that kind of with multiple classrooms to build up to the full institution, and you can think of the institution as an organism in itself. So we need to be aware that this is happening simultaneously at multiple levels, and they're not separate. They're all happening at the same time. And one other thing I wanted to kind of emphasize is that our stakeholders, when we talk about students, when we talk about teachers, I don't want to focus just on KM programs or programs related to information. I think that this is all across the curriculum. At many universities, there's knowledge principles that could be integrated into a lot of the curriculum to create a digitally literate and information literate society that is necessary. When we talk about this, that we need to think about these things across the entire curriculum.
If I could build on Jeremy's comments, and as well as Dr. Green's comments, I had the pleasure yesterday of speaking with Dr. Green at lunch, and I don't want to go too heavy here early, because it's still early in the morning, but the overarching comment would be is that the university itself, I believe, is a stakeholder. And by that I mean, for those of you who have been around the military, you may remember the term relevant and ready. So I really think that in the context of the university and what we're supposed to be doing as a center, the question we need to ask ourselves is, what are we doing and what are we offering that's going to be relevant to the community internal as well as external? And then the second part of the equation is, how do we get ready to make that happen? So it really comes down to, and this was the dimension that I was discussing with Dr. Green yesterday, it comes down to, and I like the term yesterday, the university, in my mind, should be both an incubator and a crucible, meaning that it provides the foundational work, the formal education within the discipline itself, whatever that's going to be, and then make sure once you have passed and birthed, that as a crucible you have an opportunity to come back. Which I really enjoyed was the fact, and it's one of the struggles that she has, is that knowledge management, knowledge as a discipline, doesn't seem to belong to anybody. In some schools, it's in the engineering school. Some places, it's in organizational sciences, psychology realm. Other places, it's in the business school. It seems to be a hodgepodge. So if we're going to take ourselves seriously as a credentialing organization, as an institution that becomes something of a barometer or the gold standard for this is a discipline, in my mind, it needs to start in the universities. So with that, and I'll kick that back to you.
No, actually, my sentiments exactly. But the thing is, what I hope is that we don't just group things into one all the time, because things are contextual. And even like with knowledge management, it has been rolled out as knowledge management. When you see classes, you see knowledge management 1, knowledge management 2. The thing I like about the Kent State program is that it took it to the other levels of activities within knowledge management, which then gave you areas to focus on. I think that we confuse people when you give them too much and you give them too much at one time. You know, I've looked at studies where they say you have to be very careful because too much information can render an intelligent person stupid. And so we've got to be careful of that. So even with the knowledge science, we need to understand, as I said yesterday, what are the components? And how best can we marry up those components to the proper stakeholders? I'm not saying that a stakeholder can't learn all, but I'm thinking that when they come in, they must focus on the area that they're going to work on first and then expand out. Otherwise, we'll wind up with the same problem where we're still questioning what is knowledge management, how does it fit in with me or fit in with my organization or my institution, because we're looking at it as one entity as opposed to a system of components.
And as you said, within the context of continuous learning, it's not
Absolutely.
you get the tape on your hand and move forward.
Absolutely.
That's a great lead-in to a point that I want to make. So we're going to just go with the flow here. I can't get the panel to list the stakeholders. So what we're going to do.
I don't know. Yeah.
So we did, actually, Garrison wasn't here yesterday. So my comments. I understand. Were you here yesterday? I didn't see you.
I was here for part of it.
Okay. So my comments yesterday were along the same lines. There's some terms that kind of hold us back. So I understand exactly what you're saying with the idea of stakeholders, who they are. So I like the turn of events here, which is okay. Well then, how should we be perceived? How should we, as representing a view of an organization that looks at learning for the community at large? So I think that that if at whatever level, K-12, university, and so forth, that if the institution doesn't see its job as building and preparing and perpetuating the idea of lifelong learning, then they haven't done their job. That if it's just so I want to turn the question around and say, how should the institution be viewed? Because through that lens, we can say that sometimes it's been viewed as a diploma factory. Have you heard that term? Because of how they viewed stakeholders and their needs and only meet those needs versus what it really should be standing up and doing as an institution. So that's why we'll turn that around. I think that keeps us away from doing that. That's a good point. So it could be child care, and not just at K-12. I mean, there are universities that I call child care because it's just all it does is it seeks to answer the needs of the wants of the teenager without saying, here's some other classes you're going to need. Here's some other things you're going to need to be a lifelong learner. So I want to continue with this discussion because I think Bob sort of kicked it off when he says sort of, the institution needs to be ready and what was it? Relevant. So I like, let's turn it around and say, so then we're not going to talk specifically about who stakeholders are because I think you're right. What should the institutions of learning be viewed as then? Did you want to add to your...
I'll be glad to kick it off. I think one thing that, and again, I want to keep it within the context of the center that we're establishing, because I think that's important. The universities are going to go a long ways towards legitimizing the discipline. I think that's number one. Once we can figure out, as Dr. Green said, and you said, sir, when we've got the right mix in the program, in the elements of the program. But I think the universities could go a long way toward setting the gold standard as to what's contained in terms of the original bluing, for lack of a better term, of a student. But the one thing that I see the universities providing and this is an excellent example, is, and I've learned this in my experience as a CKO, we talk about the importance, and I don't mean to offend any of the library sciences people here, so please don't get angry with me, and I won't tell you where my car is parked. But what I've learned is that you can give all the information resources, you make all the information resources in the world available to people. But if they can get to the right person, they'll go to a human being in the face-to-face contact every time. So this type of setting, the reason this center exists, or at least in my mind, from the university standpoint, is that it represents an opportunity to connect. By creating some type of expertise repository where you can come in and say, look, I just want to talk to somebody who knows something about that. Well, we can provide you this person, we can provide you this team, we can provide you with that expertise. And again, it becomes that touchstone, that gold standard for other people.
Okay. Lifelong learning. And again, this is just not tainted with others, but just my philosophy based on my experiences and my education on it. I think that in education and lifelong learning and how institutions are to move forward is they've worked pretty well. They have good models. We have not, though, taken advantage of technology. We have not inserted it in the proper places. Even things like gaming, I think, are tremendous learning tools that can be used. I mean, simulations have been used for years. We know that even our youth, that they pick up these games and they can learn them fairly quickly. We've watched as organizations, I forget the name of the organization, which was a healthcare, needed to train their network people, and they did a skunkworks project, and they decided to establish a game where everyone knew coming into an organization that was in that position would go through that game, so they reduced their learning curve significantly. And so we've got to think about the measurement of learning in the end and how it is, and if we are successful in transferring our students over into the industry. The reason I say that is because I notice as we have an institution that teaches the foundation. We have an institution that's supposed to do applied sciences, and it does work in a lot of places. But when we get into industry sometimes, what we do is we tend to not teach people to apply and then measure the application of how it's being successful. We teach them to memorize and pass tests so they can have certification. I think that's where we go wrong at. Again, I think the models are there. I mean, certainly, even when we looked at like doctors and keeping them abreast of things, I think sometimes then timing got into place. We wanted everything instantaneous, so people didn't have enough time to get in, learn what they needed to learn, and absorb it. So I think that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. What we do is we look at the structure, and I'm a firm believer of ab initio. I think anything new comes from something old. Let's look at the old, see what we can use, and then modify it so that it grows. Technology was not here to replace what we were doing. It was here to make it better and then to enable it. So we need to use it in that capacity and get back to the, I guess, faster, better, quicker types of scenarios.
So, it seems to me that we're thinking about the human center is responsible for modeling kinds of things. We'll ask people who want to go to school. I don't know if you've been at a university faculty meeting. Everybody is fairly transparent. And the question is, what are we doing with teaching? How are we going to be relevant to the world? Right? This is really we are Georgetown just adopted edX, one of the projects as we utilize experimenting. So far from what I can do, and hundreds of thousands of people who are interested in this, 230 million books. So, it seems to me that the university is a problem, and part of the reason the university is a problem is because the university comes into being, right? Nobody needs to go. The university comes into being when the alphabet comes into being. The university crystallizes at the moment the alphabet as a technology comes into being, we're all creatures of the alphabet. Institutions are functions of the alphabet. We are now at a moment, 2,500 years later, that there's a new technology that pushes beyond the alphabet, beyond print. It's reasonable to think that things can be radically different. I mean, different in a way that we cannot begin to conceive. And so just thinking about how to rewire institutions is in a way, I think, selling yourself short, right? Because the changes and the kinds of capacities and the kinds of needs that we're going to face as human beings is far beyond the capacity for print-based, alphabet-based institutions to even cope, right? Now that's a long-term, big picture point, but it seems to me again that disciplines, the idea of disciplines again, are something that is born of and the disciplining of knowledge. Not so sure. Right? I come from a program called the Program in Communication, Culture, and Technology, and our whole mission is basically to burn down the university. Right? We want to say that the way you've been dividing things since 1348 doesn't work anymore. The problems need more of an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, or even anti-disciplinary approach. So, so this one.
Okay, so I kind of want to respond to this very big assertion you've made, only because I'm working with someone to try and launch a venture. And the interesting thing that occurs to me as I'm listening to all of you is that the idea at the base, at the beginning, that we would even think about what we're creating and capture it somehow so that it could be used by others or even we could use it, it's just kind of nowhere really in the paradigm. I mean, I kind of like throw it in a little bit, but, and I'm working with someone who's in her early 30s. So I think that some of what you're saying is that this way of thinking about when you create something, that you're not just, that there's kind of this parallel thing that's being created, the knowledge that's being created, the expertise, and that that's valuable, and we should be doing something about that at the beginning, and we should even conceive of, if we're going after capital, to put that as part of the equation of the value of what we're creating. It doesn't really enter into this thinking, and there would be nowhere, you know, for us to go to say, okay, if we're conceiving of some new thing that we want to get off the ground, what are some ways that we should think about valuing the knowledge, you know, however it's conceived, know how, know what, know where, so that we can kind of incorporate that in the thinking of the value that's being created. And I keep thinking that a knowledge sciences center, you know, that even if you have to blow up the universities to reconstitute them, that would be something that would be valuable to people, to come to the Knowledge Sciences Center and say, what institution out there could help us think about this, has ways that we could, you know, it just occurs to me that that's really nowhere deep in our thinking when we create stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and that's how I envision the Knowledge Center, because we have lost so much. And again, I use these terms kind of loosely, but I say we're working toward insanity. And I know we keep talking about the 30-year-olds and the 20-year-olds, but you know what? They're still coming behind us. And whether you want to realize it or not, there's a lot of experience that does need to be captured, and they need a central place to go back to it. I have talked to them in classrooms, and they have said, look, we go into these positions and we want to know where to start. And yes, they're very intelligent, so they will get to where you were, but that means the organization has lost years while they gain that experience. So they be able to go to a place and actually see where this experience lies, the Knowledge Science Center. They can gather that and apply it towards their work. I don't know that organizations are going to capture all of it. It's been very difficult putting these types of structures into organizations and then sustaining them. Like you said yourself, resources. Most people don't put resources on managing or capturing or collecting or disseminating knowledge. They will put resources at the first gate just to get it. And then they look at you and say it has failed, but they fail to realize that it has failed because you have not contributed to it. We can only put the structure into place. You must also put the sustainability and the renewability types of structure so that they can continue. Right, at all. At all. At all. And I had a conversation with someone about this once. I was called in because they were doing process and procedures and they wouldn't allow them to do new things. The people found better ways of doing work. They didn't allow them to do this because the audit compliance. The people would come in and they would get audit compliance and and non-compliance, and they would have problems. So they called me in and they said, what do we do? And I said, an audit is to verify that you are doing what you say you're going to do, okay? So therefore, add the procedures of knowledge management to your procedures, which says people can find new ways of doing things, and therefore you are compliant with what you're saying you're supposed to do. So there are ways to do this. I think people just don't think in those terms, and they don't really bring in people who think in those terms because KM has been largely technology-based and is homeless. It does not have an owner, nor does it have a standard or consistent way of moving forward. And I want to get to German too. Go ahead. So I want to get to German because I know
I kind of want to piggyback off what Garrison's saying about reforming the institution as a whole. And so the learning scientist in the room is going to be asking constantly, every meeting, how are we even defining this learning that's happening? When we're talking about the definition of the institution, we're still explicitly having some degree of, there's a difference between education and learning, in my mind, and in a lot of the work that we do. That learning happens all the time. There's all different degrees of learning. And then there's education, which is explicit learning objectives, usually explicit, sometimes either, but at least some kind of planned curriculum that gets, I don't know, whatever model you want to use, transferred or grown or developed. So we need to be thinking about that as well. At the center, I can see a really interesting opportunity for the center to maybe, and I know best practices is not the word I want to use here, but it comes close to that, some kind of idea statement, some kind of idea center or marketplace for ideas on what we're actually wanting to teach. What do these skills and knowledge pieces look like when we're actually putting it into the curriculum? How do we communicate that to the institutions? So that's the other issue I have, is there's going to be an issue of translation between university and anything that we try to do, and then anything that business, industry, civil sector, anything that, so the center could be a great place for maybe providing a little bit of that translation as well. Anybody that's worked in the university will understand why this is the case, and it would be really helpful to figure out this definition of learning. We need to really tease that question out, really hit it hard.
I think we have a dead battery on the other mic, so just excuse us passing this one back and forth. I just want to make a comment, an observation that we've kind of, I think this is a fantastic discussion because we've turned the corner on trying to just list the people out there in places that are stakeholders, and we're actually turning it around and saying, you know, who should we be? What should this be? And I like the discussion that says, and I've heard this by more than one university myself, that there's concern even on the campus that there are silos and that people come to the university, they pick a silo, they pick a track, and they go through it and they pop out the other end, and then somehow magically in an organization, in a corporate or a government job, they're supposed to work together and understand, have some glue about where ideas come from and how to work together. And I think in addition to thinking in terms of specific knowledge management courses and practice and principles that can be courses that we talk about that should be at a master's, doctorate, and bachelor's. We talk about what level. I think that we should also be talking about this great point, which is the glue that it becomes to connect between silos. That just becomes the thing that starts to be a base across the different silos that's needed. And I think that one of the things it's going to take for us to do that is, I got a little trouble last week. If you're in Canton, I was talking about my latest edition of my book, which shameless self-promotion will get you nowhere. But some of the stuff, I have a subtitle that I just love, and I call it The Tyranny of the Testers. And it reminds me of when we understand the roles and the different roles that need to be at play in what we're trying to accomplish, why have we allowed the role of the tester, either internal or external forces, the role of the tester to dictate what we know we need to accomplish?
Just right along. Thank you very much.
Now we have to come back.
I guess one of the things that I would throw out in relation to that is everything that, at least in my opinion, everything you need to know about what it means to learn, be educated, and understand how knowledge works now or in the future, you can get from watching your kid play Mario Brothers. That's it. That's all you need to do. That's everything. Because Mario Brothers, the good folks that put together video games like that, they understand how to instruct on the fly, just in time, and in an embodied, situated way. The Mario Brothers, there's so much knowledge that goes along with one of these video games. You're a kid at the table, they're telling you about how they play this video game. The amount, I mean, it's just voluminous. All of the stuff played. The books that come with these games, like 3 pages long, and it's mostly intellectual property notes, right? They don't give them manuals. They don't need manuals. It's because the game is able to teach en route, right? And that's where the future of instruction, knowledge, and learning, I think, lies.
Web semantics, there's a lot of technologies that are out there right now that are moving toward that direction of being able to understand meaning, software that starts to understand meaning. And kind of this idea of a learner profile, if we start to use technology in learning to address these questions of funding or large classrooms, things like that, we can maybe offload some of the learning tasks to, it have to be smartly designed programs, of course, and I want to see some evidence that I just don't want to spend a whole bunch of money and have it not work. But what could happen is we could start to have what we call adaptive learning platforms, where it provides this just-in-time, the right information at the right time, whatever somebody needs, an individual learner based on their performance, based on what they're doing. I know we have just real rudimentary stuff right now, but it's exciting to be thinking about where we could be going, and the center could be a visioning agent for that as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't know who online heard that. Sorry about that. Okay, so situated learning. So with pilot training, you're connecting the dots with that situated learning, and then you go into the cockpit and you apply what you've learned in the situated. So it's like tiers. So you get your buckets first. You connect them on the simulator so you don't crash and burn, and then you get in the airplane with an instructor and you go and you do it for real. And then you do it by yourself. That's the scary one. So for me, that was kind of a model of, as I heard all of this, an interesting, I guess, template model framework, especially when we're talking adaptive learning platforms. So what if we did that with the different major problem sets that we have? Like, so we learn the different pieces in the buckets in the language, because we have to have that. And then we have these typical problems that we're starting to see at lots of different organizations, which is why knowledge management is kind of a topic. And so we build those modeling or those situations, employing the technology to help us, not drive us, and do that kind of thing. And then we could keep developing that as it goes along. So this is something you could take at different levels into different age groups, different stakeholder groups, whatever we want to call them, academia. So if we were kind of like this group that came together that posed, yesterday we talked a little bit about the situated learning and just coming up with the questions like, okay, this is a problem, so let's just make a generic game to, you know, so I guess with the kind of people that are involved in this conference this week and last week, we could come up with some doozies. Like, that would be fun too, to create those situations, to think about that. Especially if we brought in the Goodyear guys with the innovation and tie it all together. So I like the idea of connecting the silos, because as I've gone through the Kent State program for a year now, I took a class on Foundations of Knowledge Management, then Document Management and Organizational Learning from John, and then Social Network Analysis, and, you know, all these different cool things, so that I'm getting these buckets in my head, and now connecting them is so fun. Like, okay, situation A, you know, like in pilot training we had this, you have a standard problem solving when you have an emergency. You stand up straight, they give you an emergency, you stand up at attention, you say, sir, the first thing I will do is analyze the situation, take appropriate action, and land the student's conditions permit. And then you go into every one of those components. Okay, analyze the situation. That means, you know, okay, then you start asking your questions. Well, what's my fuel? What's my, you know, what do my electrical systems say? What do, you know, so you're taking this kind of survey, the situational awareness, you're building that. Okay, take appropriate action. So based on that, I'm going to do this, and, you know, that kind of thing. So that's where we can kind of, I think, provide value for different stakeholder groups by coming up with a way to cross all that and connect to different groups, like through these ideas.
Hello, my name is Brittany. I work in communications, actually, with Goodyear. Started as a knowledge management communications specialist, and having recently come out of college about 2 years ago, I wonder, Dr. Green, if we can build on this idea that the connectors already exist in the form of advisors. So every student is given a class advisor when you walk in the door, and they are to be your en route, as Garrison said, learner, advisor, as they help you plan along the way. To knowledge management, you know, the panel perspective, how does knowledge management play into that? Are these the people that we need to be training to be knowledge managers?
That's a great question. Actually, is this on? At Kent, we actually have several of these student advisors from across the campuses starting to enroll in the KM course, our program. But one of the challenges we have, and one of the values I derive from being at CCT, is just the sort of the cultural perspective I think you gain in that group. But I remember the first time I heard the word encroachment. I don't know if any of you have ever heard that word before. If you haven't, this is a good sign. But the first time I went over to communication studies group, which is part of my college, and said, I really would like to work with you on developing a storytelling course. Everybody threw up their hands and said, you are encroaching on our territory. Either your students will come and take our courses, or you can't have this course. This is now a 3-year battle that I am, yes, a 3-year battle, okay? And I've just finally said, fine, you can't give me this, right? It's totally different than what you do. You can't give me this. When the standards come out, right, on KM and what we need to have in our curriculum, it's going to be right there front and center. So either, you know, either you work with me to deliver this, you say it's not in your way, or you're going to be causing my program to be non-compliant, you know. So I'm all for putting knowledge sciences in place of the university administration, because frankly, I think it's everybody, you know, it's like it should be in every discipline, and I'd like to turn the university upside down. Yeah.
I'd like to come back to the first question and the original point about fun. And I have to kind of go around my point here. It seems like there's two different types of learner stakeholders. One is the KM people who are concentrating on KM, the people in this room, okay? And then the other learners are the people who don't do KM except as a add-on to what they actually do, you know. And here's a definition of fun that's actually called flow. And I have to take my glasses off. Flow is the mental state of operation in which a person performing an activity is fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus, full involvement, and enjoyment in the process of the activity. In essence, flow is characterized by complete absorption in what one does. And what my point about that is that if somebody is immersed in their activity, not knowledge management, but an activity outside of what, you know, not quite outside of knowledge management, but maybe helped by knowledge management, they're not focusing on knowledge management. And what I have said to people, specifically about metadata, if metadata is done well, it's invisible. Nobody sees it because they're not supposed to see it. They're supposed to use it and then move on, being absorbed in what they're supposed to be doing. Whether it's, you know, engineering, whether it's neurosurgery, whether it's piloting, they don't see it. So part of what I see, I think part of what we're trying to get to here is, first of all, how to convince people that what you're doing, you know, this knowledge management piece, connecting all the dots and connecting all these buckets, really is important. And, you know, how to convince people, like companies, and saying, there's a value to this. And what is the value? What's the value of making sure that, you know, each person in their own little silo who is concentrating on their own little silo, oh, by the way, you've got to keep in mind that there's other silos out here who have knowledge as well that might be useful to you. But we get back to this problem of the people in the silos don't really know that they're doing knowledge management, and they don't see the value in it.
Right. Can I address that? Because this is actually a perfect view of something I've been saying. Everyone does not do knowledge management. Some people contribute knowledge, and then we manage it. This is why I'm saying we have to be careful, even when we're talking to our users, because if we're taking and telling them that they're doing knowledge management, we've lost them. Now, the work that they're doing is part of the organization, and what we want is the ways they are doing it better. So they are contributing their know-how, and you have to put that in the context of what they're doing. So exactly, if I go out and I want to train my whole organization, the key is, and if you look back at standards and procedures, oh my God, it goes way back, that a component of it was knowledge. when we look at competencies, if a person is competent, there are three things that they have: knowledge, skills, and ability, okay? So we've got to come back down to, what is it that you know to do your job really well? That's a very simple statement, and when they tell you, they have contributed. When you manage the knowledge, then you have to take that and see if it aligns with the goals and objectives of the organization and the improvement of performance. But we can't take knowledge management to everybody in an organization and say, you're managing knowledge. Now, let's back up for a second. However, we do need to give them, which is the #1 complaint of most employees, we have to give them the big picture, because people get lost with the big picture and what value am I adding to the organization? And that's where we show them the big picture, we show them where they're at. You're a part of this. We're managing knowledge so we can improve the performance of our organization. And you know what? This is what we will gain, and then this is what you will get. So it has to be that type of connectivity.
Denise, I'd like to remind you that you asked me to come here, because I'm probably going to get everybody in the room angry at me, but I think that's why you invited me here. Okay, listen, as somebody who tried to hire somebody to do knowledge management when I left my agency, I got to tell you that we had a long talk at the executive level. This was at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And we decided we don't want to do knowledge management, period. What we do want to do is we want to streamline business processes. We want to learn how to help people do their jobs faster, better. This just-in-time thing, that's really nice if you're not going to make a nuclear power plant safer. For us, we got to do it in context. And so I take a look at the courses that people take in knowledge management. I considered getting a degree. And then I realized that by the time I got my degree, I might have some nice theory, but I wouldn't know how to do. Now, I don't know if that makes a difference or not. The one thing about the knowledge, whatever you're calling it, what would be helpful to me, or I think would be helpful to somebody who wants to become a, quote, knowledge management professional, would be the how-tos, the lessons learned, what did not work, so somebody doesn't make the same stupid mistakes that I made over my 5-year journey. So, for what that's worth. I mean, it's just, what I'm concerned about is you've got to think about putting things into context. And I'm not hearing that.
Having been a CKO, here's the first thing that I would ask you. Here's the first thing I would ask you. All right, I got it. What's your end state? If you can't tell me where you want to be, then you're wasting everybody's time. Now, once you tell me what your end state is, I'll get you there. That's it. And we'll do this in degrees. I'll tell you what I can do right now. I'll give you an 80% solution, and then I'll tell you what the delta is, and we'll figure out together how we're going to make that happen. The end state being a more effective organization. That's it. And that should be the guiding principle of everything we do. Okay. That's 8 years as CKO. That's all I can offer you.
I just want to piggyback real quick on that comment. I think you're right as far as end state, and I think that the language that we use defines, without us thinking about it, what those end states are. We talk about learning, being, everyone sort of describes it a little bit differently. You know, it's this constant thing that we all have to know how to do, to innovate and come up with something new. It's also the ability to pick up best practices and not have to learn those the hard way. It's instruction, it has specific goals. I think that the end state, the unspoken end state, given that all the institutions of learning here operate under something called the Department of Education, is an end state that says we're done because someone's educated. I think words hold us back. A Department of Innovation gives us a different end state. Now it's not just, okay, I know this, but I need to integrate it and work with people to come up with something, because that's a different end state. And I truly think that our own words are holding us back. They're not just words and labels, but one of the projects would be to find the right words, agreement around them, that would move us forward. I think that would be one of the early quick wins to start moving the center forward.
I was going to ask a slightly different question along those lines. So if you want to piggyback on that, go ahead.
I was going to piggyback off of Patricia for a second, for this one, something that I was just thinking. And it might step on some toes and it might cause a few people. What I've noticed in industry, and if you look at Nick Bonta's study, he did a study of CKOs, okay? So I'm going to be very clear on this, and this in no way interrupts or challenges anyone's intellect. What happened in business was CKOs were moved into positions that were not competent to perform the work. If you were in the position and you didn't understand knowledge management and you didn't have the methodology so that you could hire the people who had the right competency and then hold them accountable to do the work, then you should have backed away from that position. What happened is we stepped into those positions, you did it, you stayed there, you became frustrated, and then when they failed, you looked back and said, knowledge management is a problem. Knowledge management was not the problem. It was industry and the direction of industry who moved forward and put people in positions who were not competent to hold those positions. And this, again, has nothing to do with the intellect of the people because they were very highly intelligent people. Unfortunately, they were miscasted. They had competencies for other roles, okay? So that is, okay.
I'm just going to,
yeah, no, I'm just like,
I'm going to pile on and stick with the theme here. I think that I like verbs better than nouns. I think chief learning officers, it changes the mindset versus chief knowledge. It's a thing, it's moving. So I think that labels have mattered where people have called themselves different things has been a part of what we're describing as well.
Could I just pick up on something that Patricia said, though? We had conversations before I went to Kent, and one of the things we saw when I first started at Kent was that all the courses taught people how to talk about knowledge management. And so we've rebuilt the curriculum, and I think John and Annie will tell you that their students now learn how to do what they're talking about. So every course, KM has to be like chemistry. You read the textbook, but then you got to do some experiments in class. And I love the idea of the gaming, and because I think when we get to setting the tests for competencies, that's the route we go. Yeah. So thank you all for some great suggestions.
yeah, that's where I was going with that. Yeah. Right.
I think that academia could. I know this is actually a segue. Okay, so measurements. Can we just look at SMART measurements? I think if academia teaches a little bit more about what standard SMART measurements are, the center could also be advocating to develop those measurements, right, those SMART goals, and then the CKO's role will be a lot easier because people will have been trained on how to show that there's actually been added value. That's all.
I think that's in line with the earlier comment about flow and what it means to appreciate and understand your job at a level that's not just cognitive but also effective. And I think Bloom did us a service in 1956 that worked for the industrial age. I think you're right. If we aren't talking about measurements, if we're not talking about how we need to bring the affective and cognitive domain together in measurements, because we're not doing that now, as a place, as a goal where it needs to go, then we're not going to have the goal to get us to where we need to go.
So I guess I'd like to, if it's okay, John, I'd like to pose a new question to your board. And in my mind, it kind of brings these discussions together. And it's, I asked the question in Canton, but I'm going to ask it slightly differently here. But to set that up, so learning should be fun. I agree. Garrison's comments about gamification really hit home. Back in Canton, Melvin Blair made a statement that children are naturally knowledge seekers, and Garrison amplified that too with his Mario Brothers example. It's all there. So I guess the question, getting back to stakeholders in this conversation about, really it's about results, right? And our first stakeholder were the people being educated, and we have an engagement model question up there as well. So what I'd like to hear from the panel's perspective is, are they trying to recreate something that's actually already there when we're born? I mean, children have this, right? Is it as simple, and people that know me, I'm a simpleton, sorry, but is it as simple as maintaining what we inherently already have?
I read something interesting a couple months ago. We like to compare, and I guess my mic's not working again. So we like to compare work and play as if they're two completely different ends of the spectrum, and you're not allowed to do one if you're doing the other. But the comparison that I saw is, okay, let's not think of it as work and play. Let's think of it as work and leisure. And play can be anywhere along there. So I'm on your side because I love what I do, and I'm really engaged. And we talk about flow quite a bit in the work that we do, and that can be in any along this spectrum of work and leisure. Play should be there. It's fun. We play at work all the time. I advocate for it, and if we can figure that out, that would be great, because then everybody would want to go to work and we'd have a great time. But yeah, we're getting hung up on terms to it.
Well, fun is a terrible,
it's a bad word.
We don't talk about, I mean, we haven't talked about play. Seriously, philosophically, we have not talked about play in games for 2,500 years. It's been off the table since Plato sent the poets out of the Republic, right? So we haven't been thinking seriously about it. That's a big deal.
That's why we only have two words for it. We have play and fun, and that's really it. And
well, those are good words. I'm just going to, my short answer to the wonderful question, Dean, is that if this is to be a science, we have to approach it that way. That's what science does. That's why, so when I talk about, knowledge flow in an organization as, and you compare it to the second law of thermodynamics, I go, well, that's what science does. It says what is naturally happening. Heat leaves the room. At what rate? Let's measure that. Now what can we do? Let's put insulation on. So science starts with what is naturally happening. Fun is one aspect, not the whole piece of this. And there's a flow. There's another aspect. If this is to be about knowledge science, we have to address your question. It has to get back to what is naturally happening and how do we continue developing it and work with that.
Dean, that's why I think that games are so exciting for. Yeah, it's just not working. I guess I'm close. This is why games are so exciting, is because these immersive environments that we're now seeing, like in World of Warcraft, and what we see is that you're not just learning the memorization. I guess that's where we get hung up on the education. And when we develop a learning objective, it's student needs to know this principle. Student can really talk about KM, but doesn't know how to practice. But when you're in an immersive environment, you're not only finding things, memorizing things, or picking up information, learning how to process. You have to actually do. You have to pick that information up. You have to do something with it, and then in these 3D worlds too, you're actually moving an avatar. You're doing things that are mimicking the real world. So you're actually engaging more of these natural processes. I mean, if we go back and talk about going back 2,500 years, one of the original methods of learning was apprenticeship, right? It was you pick it up over time. You're doing all of the tasks that one would do. You're not just watching it and taking notes about it and defining things, but you're actually doing it. You're using your hands. Now, cognitive works a little bit different, sure, but and knowledge works a little bit different. But I think when we talk about things like virtual worlds or digital learning environments where we can kind of bring these things together, we're trying to get these higher order things of connecting the buckets. And as in simulation work, we love talking about airplanes because that's that's the one we can pretty much realistically mimic perfectly and never put you in the air. So it's a great great example, but how do you make a simulation for surgeons or emergency workers or things like that? It's tough. So we can take some of those principles, but each of these situated learning environments, yeah, it's going to take, every one of these are going to have to be custom. That's the other challenge of this.
Yeah, Dean, I'm in total agreement with you. I think we destroy that of the youth. We really do. And I'll give you a case in point. My daughter in her early ages, I did not want her to go to traditional. I did not want to sit down and give her ABCs. I did not want her to be the super intelligent person just starting in kindergarten, okay? So I put her into a program that had thematic types of learning and immersion, right? And I was terribly amazed at what this child would do. I come in and she's telling me about how she's coming in and she has to save her money for the duty when they leave a certain place. They had set up cockpits so that they could, not cockpits, airplanes, so that they could travel to different continents and countries. She knew all of them. This little girl at 3 years old would sit there and tell me about entomology. And I'm looking like, okay, do I remember this term? But it was really interesting to see, and she knew all of this. And then I switched her over to traditional school, and it destroyed that. So I think that with the learning and early ages, they start out really well, but a lot of parents destroy that because they kick them into traditional too early. And then as we get through the education system, as you said, they become disengaged at 4th grade, and then they become disengaged in the transition from 7th grade and disengaged again at 9th grade because there's no continuum of what they've been learning. There's no fun, okay? No, there's no flow. No fun, no flow. So I totally agree with you.
Thank you, George Morris from Phoenix Partnership. Would you accept that we add something else, knowledge and imagination? Now, to be a little bit provocative, I'm quoting Einstein, who said that imagination is much more important than knowledge. Logic takes you from A to B, imagination takes you everywhere. Now, to be more specific about the center, my understanding of the objective of the meeting yesterday and today is how the center will help one of the stakeholders today, universities. We have been struggling with this in '96, in particular in Scandinavia and Japan, for K to 12. So I'm not competent how to spark imagination for universities. I mean, why once you are in the university, but pre-university, during university, and then after university, sparking imagination. In our studies in Scandinavia in particular, the differentiating factor which created most of the social divide in knowledge economy is related to this imagination, sparking innovation, stimulating innovation, imagination, and effort, for instance. We studied a little bit the effort when you play music, learn music. The imagination is liberated. This is not a scientific 100% report I can make, but it's once you work hard and you play a piece of music, imagination is sparked, is strengthened. So how do we combine three things? Knowledge, imagination, and effort. And how do we do it in such a center? Thank you.
I'm going to stick with my theme of we use the wrong words. You're using the right word, imagination. What we talk about is creativity, and it's the wrong word. Einstein talked about imagination, and Einstein formulated a question. What would I see if I could ride on a beam of light? There's a connection between imagination and what-if questions, and there is a practice and a skill set that can be learned around that. When we call it creativity, we have people show up with purple hair saying, look at me, I'm creative, and they haven't asked any better question than the day before. So part of it is the language that we need to get back to, and quoting someone like Einstein, who was right. It was a questions and it was imagination. Where this word creativity seeped into our language and started becoming part of the programs, which has had no effect on what you're describing that we need, has got to be turned around.
If I may, let me just follow up on that real quick. And I was thinking about this yesterday based on the various discussions, and Randy has slipped out of the room on me, so I can pummel him while he's gone, since he represents the Department of Energy, and those guys drive me nuts, or used to, not anymore. He just came back in the room, so now now he's wondering what the heck's going on. I don't mean to pick on anybody, but there was a gentleman here yesterday that talked about the issue that he's been degreed, that he can't find a job. And I was talking with Randy about some of the challenges in the DOE. And then, sir, you were talking about where does the university fit in terms of knowledge, practice, and imagination? And here, what I was thinking yesterday, and I don't know how to do but that's why we have these kind of forums, wouldn't it be great, allow me one other quick caveat here. One of the things that I always, we talked a lot about words and the fact that words matter, and they do, and understanding and getting the terminology right. For my 8 years as a CKO, and as a formal CKO, I was in knowledge management before that, one of the words I used to hear tossed at me was, well, how do we inculcate knowledge management in the organization? Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that we know it for what it is, we practice it, and capture our lessons. Okay, I got all that. But, sorry, I digress. Wouldn't it be great if, as a university and a degree-granting institution in knowledge management, wouldn't it be great if we could pair with the national labs who, and again, I'm picking on Randy here, having worked with the Department of Energy. My experience with the labs is every lab is working on the same project. They don't necessarily collaborate. They wind up competing for the dollars, and there are extremely bright people in those organizations. And it frustrates me because you literally stand there and say, well, you're doing it here at Los Alamos. What are you doing at Sandia? Well, we're doing the same thing. Well, why aren't you doing the same? Well, because we're competing. Wait, don't you all work for the DOE? Yeah. Well, where I'm headed with this is, wouldn't it be great if we could, being recognized as the future professionals in this discipline we call knowledge management, knowledge sciences, whatever, that as in some type of internship program, that you come in and you work out of this office where you can kind of pull these tough nugget problems together, where you're looking at cross disciplines or efforts within a lab and saying, look, I'm your knowledge guy or girl, and you've got this effort going on over here. Years ago we used to have organizations called organizational effectiveness. Anybody been around long enough to remember the old OE organizations? And those are the types of things that this took on. But I see a niche there where the center can fit in and say, look, we've got people that are learning this as a science. We'll give them to you as free interns, if you want to compensate them. But they'll get the practical experience, they'll get the training, they'll get the practical experience, and because they're new novices in the organization, they'll provide creativity. I mean, that's just something I was thinking about. But it's in the lane you were discussing too.
Hey, yeah, okay. The whole DOE discussion is one that can take an hour in itself. The particular group that I'm with actually spent the last decade kind of trying to tease apart the work that was being done at the labs and specialize them. Say, okay, you're going to be our center of excellence for one thing, and you're going to be our center of excellence for something else. But the fact is, there are people who are relevant and know things at all the labs that are useful for this. And so something that does tie into the university environment, it's knowledge management for R&D
really needs to span very broadly. I mean, when I think of knowledge management for our organization, it would start within our office just to get the ball rolling. But once we had it established within the headquarters, ideally you'd want to reach out and include all the labs and maybe even all the, universities and companies that we work with, but certainly the labs at least, since they're part of the DOE family, they can usually get inside our firewall to some of our resources and stuff, and really try to make them part of the knowledge management universe that we deal with. But that's a sort of thing. That runs across multiple disciplines that I think could end up diluting the mission for the center that you're talking about. If there already are disciplines, and in many cases there are already centers for learning science, educational technology, cognitive science, and all of the things, all the things we've been talking about, those disciplines feed in, they may inform what we do in knowledge management. If we understand more about how people learn, that's going to inform what you do in knowledge management. But I would suggest that the center not try to encompass educational technologies and learning science and cognitive science. They're all fascinating things, and you need to be aware. One of the things that the center could do is be a place that does sort of environmental scanning of these related disciplines and helps identify where there's cool things that have been learned recently, interesting findings from those other disciplines that may be relevant to knowledge management. But I think you could end up losing a focus if you try to cover all the topics that were discussed today. Which makes me think of one other thing in terms of the name and sort of the words matter. We've been talking about this as knowledge science. Knowledge science, if you try to think about just sort of, from first principles, what would knowledge science be? Unfortunately, that covers all these different things. Knowledge science is cognitive science at its root, and then in a slightly more applied sense, knowledge science would be educational technologies and learning sciences and those kind of things, and they're kind of already covered. And what you teach, what everyone here keeps talking about, we keep talking about knowledge management, and it is a management discipline. And I personally would argue that the center should probably say Knowledge Management Center rather than Knowledge Science Center, just in order to not create the vagueness that invites all these other disciplines.
Bo had to leave yesterday afternoon. He couldn't come back to join us today, but one thing he's reminded us of is that disciplines start out as, and I think John was mentioning this earlier, as a science. And then they move forward into design and engineering, and then you end up with a management practice. The challenge that we face in knowledge management is that we jumped ahead to that final stage because there was affordable, extensive access to technology. Okay? And the original knowledge sciences were evolving out of learning, cognitive sciences, artificial intelligence, and economics, and we forgot all that. Okay? We skipped the knowledge engineering, except when we got to systems and a little bit of knowledge representation for expert systems and stuff. But we really, one of the things we're trying to do with the center is say, wait a minute, the reason we're having problems talking about knowledge management is because we really don't know what our base is, right? So it's all of these other things, but not really. So I think one of the goals I'd like to set for the center is let's stop, look back, to what the sciences should be. Maybe that's where we partner with the cognitive sciences folks, the learning sciences, et cetera, and we sort of provide an umbrella for all of these because, frankly, they are covered, right? Cognitive sciences is covered, but it's in a stovepipe in the university. And it's, you know, you approach them and it's encroachment, right? So, you know, how can we go back and look at all the different aspects of what we would really call knowledge sciences and bring them into at least a perspective? The other challenge we have in the university is too much theory and not enough practice. Kids get out of school, they can talk about the theory, you know, quote you, they know the authors, but as Annie and Bill have said, put them in a position to do something, you know, that's called this, and I don't know, that's not what they taught me, right? Sorry, I don't know if that made any sense, but I think one of the goals is we have to bridge that.
That makes sense. The other half of what I was talking about is if you try to think about the constituency, which was part of the focus for the couple of days, and again, it gets back to our constituency may not be helping teachers teach better. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about the fact that we need to reform the way we teach and the way we do curricula and that kind of stuff, but I'm not sure I think if you start getting into that area, again, you may be diluting the stuff that you want to focus on. Whereas if you think about universities and research enterprises outside of universities as organizations, organizationally, they make a good client, and there's a lot that a center can do to serve them. They have management problems, same as any organization. So the first step is knowledge management can help them manage themselves better, manage their own processes, just do everything administratively that any other organization might want knowledge management to help them with. Beyond that, there are certain particular functions. Advising came up as one of the ones that I thought about as an example, where there are faculty who are good advisors for their students, faculty who are just not really terribly good at it, or don't really know where to start, or they get faced with a student whose interests are broader than they can deal with or whatever. Having something like a community of practice for faculty advisors might actually improve the art of advising, or the art of teaching, or some of these other things. And those are places where knowledge management tools can help universities and academic institutions do a better job without trying to also without the center can help them with that without trying to also help them do the actual teaching better, which may come from other, I would argue that should probably come from a different center just to allow people to focus a little more.
Is that we need to clearly we need to differentiate what the university does from what the center does, okay? Because as we said last week, as Rosemary Dumont, who's one of our emeritus professors at Kent said, you want to leverage what the academic culture can, what you can benefit from in the academic culture, but you don't want the academic culture to crush you, right? Because it will, the encroachment, this is mine, I know, I'm the expert, you need to learn from me, etc. That can be quite crushing. So maybe as we work through these questions in the work groups, we can keep in mind that, don't hesitate to put down any ideas, but then we'll say, well, this is the university. This is how we can improve the university, how it works. And here's what the center does. Is that okay? Yes. Oh, I love that. Yes. Which is generally under construction anyway, right? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, panel.
Mm-hmm.